This information you are about to hear and perhaps view, these are not necessarily the thoughts or the ideas of Gary C.Clement or the Gary Clement Radio Show podcast. We are in no way, shape, or form affiliated with the parties this story is about or was interviewed for. Parts of this content may not be owned by or the property of the Gary Clement Radio Show podcast, G2 Network Media, or any other company we are affiliated with, and this information is strictly the opinion of those being interviewed. This content is for information purposes only, and although we may make reference to various news stories, we share our own independent beliefs about the content and provide our own opinions. Please enjoy the information. Yes, this is Gary Clement, and this is the Gary Clement Radio Show podcast. And today we have a young lady who's here to talk about several different things, possibly. In not just the Black community, but in many communities. Many of us suffer from mental illness and issues that create nothing but chaos and confusion in our families and our lives. Today's guest has a PhD in psychology and she's a licensed marriage and family therapist, a sports family therapist, a life coach providing services to individuals, couples, families, and groups. And her name so happens to be Dr. Lauren Pitts. How are you today?
I am good. Thank you. I'm so good. Thank you for having me. I count this as an honor and a privilege. And I want to, as tickled as I am that you gave me those additional credentials, just for the sake of clarity, I have an EDD in Educational Leadership and Administration, and I am a licensed marriage and family therapist. So I hold an EDD, not a PhD, because I don't want folks to say, she's a psychologist. No, I'm not. I'm a licensed marriage and family therapist and a sports family therapist. I don't want the credentialing board calling me, talking about me falsely advertising my credentials, but it's okay. People call me a psychologist all the time.
I see. Okay. So, first of all, just tell us about your background and, why you saw studying the curriculum that you did, to be such a help in our communities.
Sure. I'll tell you, Gary, growing up in southern New Jersey, which is a very economically depressed area, it wasn't as depressed back when I was a child as it is now. But education was paramount in my home, in my family, in my community. And at that point in time, the school district that I grew up in, we had one of the best school districts in New Jersey at the time. And there was always just this tremendous emphasis put on it. But like many people, I have a story. I have a traumatic history, and I'm 55 years of age now. I've never met my biological father. My stepfather had to go away for a while, if you will, when I was in first grade and didn't come home until I was in ninth grade. And my relationship with my mom was always tumultuous back then. But there was always still this tremendous emphasis on being a stellar student and the fact that education could take me far. My grandmother had a 10th grade education. My grandfather had an 8th grade education. And my grandfather told me in 6th grade that my brain was going to be my ticket out of Salem, New Jersey. And Gary, I believed him. So I was always a good student. It was always expected of me. But as it relates to my decision to become a therapist, I looked around me every day of my life, and as blessed as I was growing up in a Christian family and all of those things, there were just still things going on around me that just didn't feel right to me, if that makes sense. And even as a little kid, I knew that I wanted to be different. I knew that I wanted my experiences in life to be different, but I also recognized that there were problems, right? And as a small child, I didn't understand the depths of those problems, but I was always very inquisitive. And I said, you know what? I'm going to figure out how to help people with their problems. So at the age of 16, from the innocence and purity of a child's heart, I went up for altar call one day, and I prayed and asked God to make me, to my family, my friends, my community, and the world, what Moses was to the children of Israel. Now, I know that sounds insane, because every time I say it to somebody, I'm like, what was I thinking? But that was the innocence and purity of my heart at that time. I knew that I wanted to be instrumental in helping people to not hurt. And so, sort of back and forth in sixth grade, I told my grandfather that I wanted to go to college, and he told me my brain was going to be my ticket out of Salem. And I was like, well, okay, I can handle that part. And, the rest is history, and what a journey it's been.
Right. Wow. So now tell me, is it a true saying then that as Afro Americans in our communities, we need one kind of therapist, but in Caucasian, communities, they need a different kind of therapist? Is that true? Or explain that to me, please.
So I don't necessarily agree with that because I have colleagues of all ethnicities that are outstanding clinicians and are wholeheartedly committed to the healing and the deliverance and the overall improved well-being of their clients. But what I will say to that is cultural sensitivity is real. And so oftentimes that cultural sensitivity piece is not there. And one of the things that my co-host and I discuss on my podcast is it's not just enough, Gary, to take a cultural sensitivity class or to do a cultural sensitivity certification. It's like learning a foreign language, right? You hear people say the best way to learn it is to submerge yourself in that culture. Well, it's the same thing when it comes to clinical work. You have to actually educate yourself and empower yourself to learn about other cultures in order to be most effective in serving that ethnic group. I remember when I was in grad school, it was a crazy time, and I had gotten really, really quiet and withdrawn in class, and the professor had asked me, what is going on with you? This is not like you. And I wouldn't talk about it. And I'm not typically a person that shuts down. But what it all boiled down to was I was in a cohort that was predominantly Caucasian. And the microaggressions that we hear about, right, the little snippy comments, and, what was clear is that what they were seeing me as an angry black woman, even in grad school. They didn't have the ability to see that my pain was real and that my struggle was real.
Mm-hmm.
So my professor at the time, like, she literally slammed the brakes on class and said, we're going to address this and we're going to address it right now. We're going to unpack it. What's going on? And what I said to my classmates that day was, you couldn't be my therapist. You can't see past my presenting emotional experience. You're not even compassionate enough, empathetic enough, caring enough to understand why I present the way that I do. I'm not an angry black woman. I'm a hurting black woman.
Mm-hmm.
How could you ever help me or anybody that looks like me if you're coming in the door judging me based on your initial exposure? And that's something that we as mental health practitioners have to be very, very careful about in order to be able to service any clientele, regardless of what their ethnicity is. So that's why I say I disagree with that, because I do have colleagues that don't look like me that are phenomenal clinicians. But then there's, there's clients that don't look like me that are not equipped to work with people that look like us.
Right.
So it is what it is. It's both of those things, and it's on the clinician to get themselves right so that they can service their clients effectively.
I see. Okay, cool. Now, I know one trying period in our culture, well, just our culture, this country, period, a couple of years ago was COVID-19. How did that affect your business? How did that affect, everything that you do, I guess?
Oh, my goodness. Gary, I tell you, COVID has been both a blessing and a curse. And the reason why I say that it was a curse is because, the world shut down, right? My heart goes out to those individuals and family members, friends, and others that I don't even know, whose businesses and livelihoods and everything about their life was turned upside down, and it was like life snatched the rug out from underneath of them. A number of family members that suffered very, very bad with the COVID outbreak. I lost my father-in-law to COVID and complications, and just people that are near and dear to my heart, who it was touch and go there for a while. My mother lost friends, and other family members had, people that are part of their intimate circle outside of the family system that, succumbed to COVID. So it was a hard time. The flip side of that, though, is, as you can imagine, mental health issues went through the roof.
Yeah.
So my work grew exponentially. When I tell you, Gary, that my caseload quadrupled. My caseload quadrupled, and I was able to make the transition from sole proprietor to LLC, which I'm in the process of doing now. I'm in the process of dotting I's and crossing T's so that I can open physical office space, because I've been doing telehealth all this time, whereas prior to the pandemic, I was seeing clients in person. But my private practice has grown exponentially since COVID.
I can imagine. I can definitely imagine. Okay, cool. So you have a book, The Queen Within, Becoming the Woman God Intended. If you would just share a little bit of that with us, please.
Wow. Well, for starters, it took me 15 years to write it. So secondly, I tell folks I'm more in touch with the Queen Within, more so now than I've ever been in my life, but I can honestly say I don't know that I've completely found her. And the reason why is because I believe we're constantly evolving, right? But it was back in 2002, I want to say 2001, 2002. I was residing in Tallahassee, Florida at the time. I was the director of catering at Florida A&M University, and I was sitting in my home office off on disability because I had worked myself literally to death. And God was speaking to my heart, Gary. He was speaking to my heart, and I knew I've always had a passion for writing. It's something that God has gifted me and anointed me to do. I started journaling at a very, very young age, and I knew that I always wanted to be a published author. My heart's desire is to be a New York Times bestselling author, but I felt like God was just starting to download into me, and he gave me titles, and that was one of the titles that he gave me. But little did I know that prayer that I prayed at 16, help me to be like Moses was, that all of that was going to sort of pour into this journey of becoming the Queen Within. So it took me 15, not quite 16 years to write it, and it was crazy because I was sitting on it. I was just sitting on it. Was having dinner with a colleague, and she was like, what are you doing with this book? And I was like, it's done. And she was like, are you sure? I'm like, yeah. She was like, you don't sound sure. Like, you don't sound sure. I was like, no, I'm done. She was like, yeah, I don't believe you. She was like, pray about it, go back, reread it, do some edits to see how the Lord leads you. And as a result of that, it was like a couple of more years that were poured into it. What it all boils down to, Gary, is that book is my testimony. It's my testimony from really my youth, my young years. I would say like 4 or 5 years of age, up until the time that I stopped writing it. And the reason why I wrote it, other than being led by God, the reason why I chose to be obedient. Let me say it that way. The reason why I chose to be obedient and write it is because I spent a lot of years suffering in silence. I spent a lot of years feeling condemned and shamed and less than. I felt unloved and unwanted and undesired and unneeded, and I just emotionally inside I was a train wreck. And I said, I know that there's no way that I can be the only person that's having these experiences, but the enemy had tricked me for years into believing that it was just me. Nobody was feeling the magnitude of pain that I was feeling. And I said, you know what? I'm going to be a part of the solution. I am going to use this book to be a part of the solution for men and women and boys and girls so that they know that they're not alone, because I had spent a lifetime feeling alone and forgotten and kicked around like trash. And my heart's desire is to help people to not hurt. So I was like, you know what? I'm going to put it out there. And people said, cannot believe you're putting all your business out there and that people are going to judge you and they're going to criticize you. And I'm like, well, they're doing that anyway. So, why not help people in the process while experiencing what I've always experienced, which is judgment and criticism and condemnation. So I walk by faith and put it out there.
Cool. Wonderful. And how far did it chart? Because I know that you have it in Barnes & Noble. It was on Amazon. Did you make the New York Times bestsellers list? Or
I haven't yet, but for me, it's still a faith walk. It is still a faith walk. Next week, today's the 12th of April, so April 18th through the 20th, it's being featured at the London Book Fair. So super duper duper excited about that. Humbled, counted as an honor and a privilege that it was selected to be featured at an international book fair, one of the largest in the world. So super excited about that. And then it's also going to be featured at the LA Times Book Festival. That's going to be, I think that's the last week in April, the first week in May. So definitely hoping that, the additional book sales will come as a result of that. It had a slow start, but the Word of God that I read says don't despise small beginnings. So I just know that if the Lord so chooses, he'll breathe on it and it'll be out there and folks will buy it and be blessed by it and it'll serve its purpose.
Right. Okay. And I hear also that you're a very spiritual person too. That helps a lot with this struggle, I guess, too.
Oh my goodness. I've often said that the only reason why I'm not dead in jail, crazy, a drug addict, alcoholic, or prostitute is because of my relationship with God. I didn't have perfect parents. I didn't have perfect grandparents or family, no more than anybody else. But I tell people pretty regularly that the one thing, amongst others, but one of the key things that my parents and my grandparents did right was they introduced me to the Holy Trinity. I wasn't that kid, Gary, that had to be drugged to church kicking and screaming. And, in our age group, right, it's like you're in church 7 days a week. you got morning service, afternoon service, evening service, prayer meeting, choir. Like, I grew up in the church, and unlike some of my family members in similar age, I love being there. I couldn't wait for Vacation Bible School. I couldn't wait for Sunday school. I knew that I wanted to be all that God purposed and predestined me to be. And, I missed the mark a lot. But at the end of the day, my heart's desire has always been to be who God purposed and predestined me to be. And that's Lauren flaws and all.
Okay.
That's the good, the bad, the indifferent parts of me.
Okay. So now speaking about, spiritual and religious, overtones, I guess now for young people this day and time, they don't share, like you said, I'm 54 years old, and they do not share the same sentiment about religion as we did coming up. You're right. Yeah, it's a totally different world now. Wouldn't you agree?
I do, but can I speak to that for a minute?
Sure, absolutely, yes.
I believe, and this is just, I tell folks, don't send me hate mail. I believe that the reason why that is because there are so many denominations that practice from a dogmatic, legalistic religiosity, I know that's probably not a real word, perspective. And if the body of Christ is where we're supposed to be able to come for healing and deliverance and unconditional love, you shouldn't be more wounded in the body than you were when you were in the street. And I think that that's a big issue. I remember, I was a teen mom, and I remember being required to sit toward the back of the church when I was pregnant with my son. But I could put that offering in the plate. They would gladly bring that offering plate to me, but I couldn't walk up my offering in the plate. And Gary, that just seems hypocritical to me. Where is God's love in that?
Right.
And I think that's the big thing. I think the young people of today feel so condemned and so judged and so criticized and so dismissed. Why would you? Why would you come through the doors when you have these people who forget that there but the grace of God go I. I think people forget where they came from. There ain't nobody walking on water, but folks act like they do. Well, why would you want to walk through the doors when people are going to treat you like a pariah?
Right.
I think that we have to do a better job, and I say it all the time in my practice. I pride myself, Gary, on meeting people in a place of common humanity with an open mind and an open heart. I'm not here to condemn them or judge them or criticize them. Somebody said to me, they were talking about smoking weed, cannabis, right?
Mm-hmm.
And I said, they were like, well, weren't you smoking weed at 25? I said, no, actually, I stopped at 21. I said, but the problem with today's kids is cannabis today is not cannabis of yesterday.
Right.
I live in Fort Worth, Texas.
Mm-hmm.
We have a fentanyl issue here where the marijuana is being laced with fentanyl. These kids aren't just smoking marijuana that somebody grew in a box in the backyard.
Right.
They're smoking marijuana that's laced with stuff that's taking you out of here.
Mm-hmm.
That's a problem.
Yeah.
That's a problem. So if all you're going to do is judge and criticize, see, I can have that conversation with my children, with my nieces and nephews, with my younger cousins, and be like, hey, I'm not judging you.
Mm-hmm.
I did it. My concern is that you're going to get something that's going to kill you.
Right. Mm-hmm.
That's my concern. My concern is that, weed of 2023 is not weed of 1983.
Right.
It's weed today is killing you.
You're absolutely right.
You got to be able to meet them where they are and just you got to create. Let me sum it up in a nutshell.
Mm-hmm.
Kids don't feel emotionally safe coming into church today.
Okay.
They just don't. And if you can't create that emotionally safe space, then you have a problem. I'm blessed and fortunate that I'm a member of the Potter's House Dallas under Bishop Jakes. So he goes, and our ministry goes to great lengths to provide that support system for our youth ministry. But that's not everybody's story, Gary.
Right.
That's not everybody's story.
That's right. Absolutely. Right. Okay. I was going to ask you, in our communities, when it comes to therapy, many people see your job as a way to say that they have some type of mental illness. Okay. How do you convince your clients that seeing a therapist is a healthy or a good thing?
So I don't convince them. I don't try to convince people. I present therapy as a healthy way to not just be walking around suppressed. And what I mean by that is this. Those raw gutter emotions, they're going to come out eventually, right? They're going to come out one way or another. Mm-hmm. So I present therapy. People say, well, Dr. Pitts, aren't you a human behavior expert or relationship expert? I said, I am, but I'll never be the expert of your life. So the approach that I take is I present myself to my clients as a relationship and an emotional coach. And I ask very simple questions like, do you think that there are ways that you could go about learning how to express your emotions differently? Do you think that there's ways that you can improve in dealing with the trauma of your past or whatever, right? And they, of course, they say yes. And I was like, okay, well, let's talk about it. Mm-hmm. Let's talk about it. You don't have to have a mental illness to talk to somebody about what's hurting you. It's not always about, yes, there are clients clearly that I have that have mental illness, but I'm also a life coach, right? So I tell folks, you know what, let's do some proactive work so you don't develop a mental illness and have to have a formal mental health diagnosis that follows you from now until Jesus comes. Let's be proactive and unpack some stuff because, as I used to say when I was working inpatient drug and alcohol, secrets keep you sick. You can't heal it, Gary, if you won't uncover it. And that's a major issue in our homes, in our families, and in our communities. Black folks don't want to talk about nothing. Well, go on in this house, stay in this house. Don't be putting my business in the street. Well, how's that working out for you?
Yeah,
How is that working out for you?
Mm-hmm.
We have to talk about it to heal it.
Mm-hmm.
You don't have to see me as a therapist. Just see me as somebody that you can talk to. See as somebody you can kick it with. And I'm not going to judge you. I'm not going to criticize you. I tell my clients all the time, I'm a human therapist. So I'm allowed to say some stuff that's going to make you fall back in your chair. Like, my clients say, Dr. Pitts, you're crazy. I'll be that, but I'm going to help you be well. How about that?
Right. Yeah, that's interesting because you're right. Because like I said, there are a lot of relationships and children that are here that normally would not be here if people were honest about things, and a lot of secrets and stuff that have been kept over the years, especially with older people.
Oh gosh, take stuff to the grave. You got pedophilia and domestic violence, and you know, well that's so and so daddy, but it's really his uncle, and craziness,
Yeah.
craziness, and nobody's talking about it. Okay, well, we're gonna talk about it. We're gonna talk about it. We're gonna unpack it, and we're gonna get past it so that you can stop being eroded of your power to be the best version of yourself that you can be.
Right. I understand. I hear you. Okay. So you're also the host of your own podcast, House Talk Pregame. Tell us about that, please.
Yeah, yeah. So House Talk pregame was birthed 3 years ago out of House Talk. House Talk was started over 5 years ago. Just the hard conversations. Like I don't know if you can tell, but I'm an alpha female, and I'm a close talker. I'm a in your face in space type of person. I am a kick the elephant in the butt to get him out the room, but he got to get out of here because he's messing up our whole area, right? So House Talk started actually because I was promoting a conference that I was going to be doing in Philadelphia to address sexual assault awareness and domestic violence awareness. Well, the irony of it is, I don't believe it was a surprise to God, but the conference never happened. But the podcast stayed. So I was like,
Mm-hmm.
okay, you could have just told me to start a podcast, God, but okay. So then as we continue to talk, and I've always, always, always been passionate about sports. I love, love, love sports. I'm from a family of scholar athletes, friends scholar athletes. My now deceased first husband was a scholar athlete and coach. My son's father, former scholar athlete and coach. And so it's all in my veins and my DNA. But what I realized, even as a small child, is that people act different when they lose. People act different if they get cut from the team. People act different if they get benched. People act different. By the time I got to high school and that maturity started to really kick in on another level, I'm like, okay, wait a minute. These folks acting crazy. This is not just about this is not just anger here. There's some other stuff going on. There's some identity issues going on. There's a problem. And then my freshman year in undergrad, I was sexually assaulted by a scholar athlete who in my mind was virtually untouchable. And I was like, you know what? This has to be my niche. So long before the NFL had a campaign and the NBA and the MLB and everybody, long before Lauren became Dr. Pitts, I was having conversations around sports and mental health. And that's why I made that transition from House Talk to House Talk pregame. We address sports and mental health, but we talk about it, Gary, in a systemic, holistic, strength-based, and solution-focused way because athletes are human beings. Coaches and trainers are human beings. And they're experiencing life within the sports arena, but also outside of sports. And those conversations just are not being had to the degree that they need to be had. We see these campaigns running now, but people still aren't talking about it. It's like, oh, yeah, we're going to, athletes and mental health, and we need to address this, but are we really? Are we really addressing at the depths of it? Don't get it wrong, the team, they've got their sports psychiatrist and their sports psychologist, but are we having the systemic conversations? Is there a single team, collegiate or professional, that has a licensed marriage and family therapist at their disposal? And the research that I've done says no. But they've got, and I'm not knocking my colleagues that are LCSWs, the licensed clinical social workers,
Mm-hmm.
but the approach therapeutically that I and my colleagues as LMFTs take is a deeper dive, if you will, into the family system and the adverse childhood experiences and some of the key things that really have the ability to adversely impact the athlete's development. And I just felt like we needed to talk about it. So every week on Saturdays, we have those hard conversations about the athlete, the life of the athlete, and how life within and beyond athletic performance is impacting how they're showing up in life.
I see. Very interesting. Very interesting. Okay, cool. So for those people who want to learn more about you, they want to purchase your book, know about your upcoming projects, please give us your contact information.
Yep. So all of my social media accounts are under my name. So Dr. Lauren Pitts, Dr. Lauren D. Pitts. My website is my name. It's drlaurendpitts.com. There's a contact form on there. They can reach out to me. Toll-free number 833-574-8878. They can, if you click on the House Talk tab on my website, you can even sign up to be a guest to contribute. So, Gary, I need to get you on my show. To pick, all the topics for upcoming shows for the remainder of this season are there, so that, if you want to be a guest and contribute to the discussion for a particular show, certainly we welcome folks to do that. As I stated in the beginning, I'm in the process of dotting I's and crossing T's to open physical office space here in the DFW Metroplex area. So, barring anything unforeseen, we will be opening our offices here this summer. Do telehealth. Google me. There's a bazillion different ways to connect with me. I tell folks, just Google my name, Dr. Lauren Pitts. I come up. I'm everywhere.
We really do appreciate our guests who participated in this episode, and we hope you learned something that will bless your day and your life. For all who are interested in learning more about the Gary Clement Radio Show podcast, please visit www.amazon.com and order my book, The Gary Clement Radio Show, When Strong Afro-American Men and Women Stand Up. It covers everything about us and features a variety of Afro-American personalities who speak out about the importance of education and literacy in the Black community. Well, we thank you for tuning into our podcast. Please send us your email address so we can contact you when we have new releases and new episodes and new projects as well. You can reach us at gccpresents@yahoo.com. And also, if you're interested in submitting any materials or want to get in touch with us, please do so by simply sending an email to gccpresents@yahoo.com. That's G as in Gary, C as in Charlie, C as in Charlie, presents@yahoo.com. So until next time, do take care. And this is a G2 Network Media production.